Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to honour our much loved and respected resident, Ann Ayre Hely, who has been awarded the Royal Red Cross in recognition of her work as a nurse in the Crimean War. Now, as you know, this investiture was to have taken place in Windsor with Her Majesty the Queen, but as Mrs. Hely's health does not allow her to travel such a great distance, Her Majesty has kindly agreed that it can take place here today. The Rector has generously allowed the use of this room for the purpose, and we are delighted that Lady Cave has kindly agreed to make the presentation.
It gives me great pleasure to present this award to Mrs. Hely in recognition of her services in nursing the sick.
Might I make so bold as to introduce myself, Mrs. Hely? I'm a reporter on the Leicester Chronicle. Might I have a few moments of your time for an interview?
Certainly not. We're not finished with proceedings. We are about to sing the national anthem, and then we shall be having tea. We cannot allow Mrs. Hely to be wearied with tiresome newspaper interviews.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to tire the honoured lady. Please forgive me.
Come to my rooms tomorrow, young man. You shall have your interview then.
Well, if you're sure, please keep it short. Mrs. Hely tires easily. God save our gracious Queen, long live our noble Queen, God save the Queen.
Ah, there you are, young man. Come on in and sit down. Can I get you anything? Tea, perhaps?
Not for me, thank you. I don't want to put you to any trouble.
Oh, it's no trouble. But if you're sure... Well, what would you like to know?
Well, perhaps if we begin at the beginning. Were you born here?
Oh, yes, in Ravenstone. Yes, I was, dear.
What, here in the hospital?
Oh, it's not a hospital in that way. I was born here, and my parents kept the plough in, and my father also worked as a blacksmith.
Ah, and how long ago was that, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, gentleman never asks a lady her age.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry.
Well, when you get to my age, you don't mind so much. In fact, I'm rather proud of it. I was born in 1819.
So you're
Arithmetic not your strong point. I'm 78, dear. I'm not doing too badly, am I?
No, indeed. And so you were born in the village?
Yes, in the village here. Grew up here. And helped my parents at the plough-in until I got married. My father died in 1838, so it was just mother then.
So you were an only child?
Oh no, I had brothers and sisters. Thomas, my eldest brother, took up blacksmithing like my father. Of course, my name wasn't Hely then. I was Anne Bradshaw.
And when did you get married?
That was in 1851. I married Dr. John Hely.
So how did you meet?
Well, Dr. Hely was the village surgeon. He was a good bit older than me, and he wasn't born here. In fact, he was Irish. He came to the village sometime in the 1840s, and he used to come into the plough quite often, and I got to know him then. Sometimes he told me about his work. He used to work here sometimes. Some of the ladies that were here at the time knew him, you see. And if they were sick, they would ask to send for him. That was in Reverend Webb's day. I also remember how cross Dr. Hely was when Reverend Webb said he wasn't to come anymore.
That seems a little harsh.
Oh, my husband thought it a great injustice both to himself and to the women here to deprive them of the attention of the nurses just because they had chosen to employ him. They paid him out of their own money after all.
So was he allowed to come back?
Sadly, no. It was a source of great distress to him. But they've always been very strict about the rules here, even today.
What are the rules?
Well, all the women were obliged to attend chapel every morning and church on Sundays. Well, you would expect that, wouldn't you? We have a uniform to wear, and we are not to be absent from the hospital without the master's leave. We can go away to visit friends or relations, with his permission, of course, but not for no more than 6 weeks in any 1 year.
Is it hard to live by those rules?
Not really. As a nurse, I'm quite used to living a disciplined life, and we do have many advantages living here. We pay no rent, and we are given a pension and coal in winter. We have water from the pump in the courtyard and a marvellous laundry house with a copper boiler. So much better than trying to do the washing in your own house.
How do you cook your food?
Well, in the usual way, over the fire in the living room. It's plenty good enough. Actually, I was used to grander kitchens when I was in service with the Earl of Zetland. He's been made a Marquis now, you know, but he was an Earl then. That was up in Yorkshire. But anyway, the facilities here suit me very well. Far better than a lot of people having their own cottages.
So to come back to your marriage to Dr. Hely, was it then that your nursing career started? You said you worked in the inn before you were married.
Well, yes, I did assist my husband in his work. I learnt the basics of nursing care. I got a taste for it then, I suppose. But my proper hospital training started when I went out to the east with Dr. Coote and his wife.
To the east? You mean the Crimea, I suppose?
Oh yes, the Crimean War. But first I went to Smyrna in Turkey.
Dr. Hely too, I suppose?
Oh no, dear. Sadly my husband died in tragic circumstances only 3 years after we were married. He'd accidentally drank poison. It was most distressing.
I'm so sorry. I knew you were a widow, of course, but I had no idea.
Well, don't worry, dear. It was a long time ago.
So, tell me more about nursing in the Crimea.
Well, we knew the war was raging out there. The papers were full of it. After my husband died, there wasn't much to keep me here, and we'd heard that they needed help in the hospitals, which were becoming overcrowded.
So you answered the call?
Yes. I went out with some other women. We travelled out in March 1855 with Dr. Coote and his wife. It was quite a challenge. My mother was against it. It was unheard of for women to go out into a place of war like that and do that sort of work. Everyone thought we would fail, but we didn't.
So what was the journey like? How did you get there?
Well, we crossed the Channel from Folkestone to Boulogne by ship. A most uncomfortable journey, I can tell you. I had never been to sea before, never even seen the sea. Then overland to Marseille, and from there we sailed in a ship called the Sinai. I've got a picture of it here. It took us via Malta, another very unpleasant sea voyage. The Mediterranean looked so inviting when we set out, but we soon learnt differently. We arrived at Malta some days amidst wind and rain. We couldn't get into the regular harbour, the sea was too rough. When we did get ashore, some of the women decided they had had enough. They set off back on the next ship home.
But not you?
No, indeed. After a few days we arrived in Turkey, and so I arrived at Smyrna. It was raining there too. We nurses were given rooms in the hospital. The lady nurses were housed in a Turkish house.
Lady nurses? What do you mean?
Well, they were well-to-do, educated women from wealthy backgrounds who had volunteered to help. They weren't trained nurses, so they couldn't do things like dressing wounds, but because of their class, they were considered higher ranking than us.
You must have resented that, surely.
Well, not me. I just wanted to get on with the job. But some of them did resent it, yes, and there was some unpleasantness caused by some of them. But here, let me show you a picture of the hospital. It used to be the Turkish barracks, and they converted it into a hospital. The doctors weren't very pleased to see us when we arrived. They thought we would just get in the way, but we soon proved them wrong. It was very overcrowded when we arrived, and we set to work straight away. There were men with fever, many with terrible frostbite. I remember one poor boy whose skin was coming away every time we redressed his feet, right down to the bare bones, and he bore it all so bravely. Most of the men were always very appreciative of what we could do for them. See what it says here. Our soldiers are delighted with the nurses. One poor fellow burst into tears and exclaimed to me, "I can't help crying when I see them. Only think of English women coming out here to nurse us. It is so homelike and comfortable."
And this was where, did you say?
Smyrna. It's the far end of the Aegean Sea on the Turkish coast. I learnt so much there. I realised when I got out there how little I knew about hospital nursing.
And there you were, dealing with horrific injuries from the battles, I suppose.
Well, yes, but most of the patients were not wounded. They were suffering from fevers, typhoid, dysentery, cholera, all sorts. Some of the doctors and the nurses were taken sick with the fever. I was quite seriously ill myself with typhus soon after I arrived, but happily I recovered. Some were not so lucky. One of the nurses, Drusilla Smythe, died in the April.
Oh dear, that must be very distressing.
Oh, it was very sad. But it was a long time ago, and we did see a lot of death and suffering.
So you spent the whole war at Smyrna?
Oh no, dear. After about 8 or 9 months, I was transferred to a new hospital in the Dardanelles. Renkioi it was called.
So why did you leave Smyrna?
Well, in the summer of 1855, things went very quiet for us. We had very few patients, and we thought we might be closed down. But then after the fall of Sebastopol, we were busy again. We were sent several hundred new patients, and we were busy again.
And how did you feel about that?
We were glad of it. We hated being idle. Everything was going on so quietly, so busily, and to all appearances so securely. No more talk of returning home or volunteering for Scutari or the camp. To our consternation, astonishment and dismay, a government shell suddenly burst in our midst in the shape of Colonel Lefroy, who shattered all our fine hopes and prospects to the four winds by telling us that our excellent hospital was to be given up and converted into barracks for the Swiss Legion, while patients were to go to Renkioi. We were so upset. Well, there was nothing we could do. 2 nurses went to Balaclava, 6 of us went to Renkioi, and the rest were sent home. I left for Renkioi on the 19th of November on a ship called the Melbourne. Here's a picture of it arriving there. We had 138 patients on board. Most of them were sick. Only a few were wounded. We left Smyrna in the afternoon and arrived at Renkioi the following evening, but we didn't disembark until the next morning. A strong party of soldiers and orderlies were sent out to help bring the patients to the hospital. Most were able to walk, but there were a few on stretchers. Of course, they didn't walk all the way to the wards. They had a special horse-drawn railway for that. It was about a quarter of a mile from the shore to the hospital corridor, you see, so they were all loaded into the trucks and covered up with blankets. The nurses who were already there had been busy getting the wards ready. The stoves were lit at one end, and at the other water, arrowroot and other necessities to keep hot and ready in Price's candle stoves. The ward orderlies had been busy getting the beds made ready. The patients were all in bed, warm and dry, by 3:30.
You were busy then, I take it.
Oh yes, we worked hard. And although we were sad to leave Smyrna, we had to admit that Renkioi was a wonderful hospital to work in. Actually, I've got some pictures of it here. Let me show you. It was a wooden hospital designed by Mr. Brunel. These wooden huts were the wards. They were so well designed. Conditions were so much better than at Smyrna. Well, it had been specially designed set of buildings, and they had listened to what Miss Florence Nightingale had to say about how hospitals should be. The wards were clean and wonderfully well ventilated. The only thing was, the windows were very high up, so you couldn't see out of them. But they were there for the ventilation, you see. There were 50 beds in each ward, arranged in 4 rows, with a low partition between the middle. I was given a whole division to look after, which was 3 wards, but the facilities made it easier than at Smyrna. We had fresh running water, as much as you wanted, and flushing toilets. It was marvellous. The soldiers were amazed when they arrived. Most of them had never seen a flush toilet. Well, none of us had. Mr. Brunel had sent special instructions to tell us how to use them. He was very strict about it. This was the kitchen. There were 2 of them. They turned out good, clean, wholesome food. The men really appreciated it and helped them to get well again. They could fry or bake food as well as boil it. In their units at the front, the men only got boiled meat. There were 2 laundry buildings, and soiled linen was exchanged for clean every day. Everything was most hygienic, just as Miss Nightingale had said it should be, although actually she never saw the place herself. Too busy with her own work, I suppose.
But you met her in Smyrna, I suppose.
Oh, she never came there either. I met her in London when we got back to England.
Did you see any of the fighting?
Not the actual battles, no, they were too far away. But we did have some excitement sometimes.
Oh.
Well, I say excitement. It was very frightening at the time.
What happened?
Well, once or twice we came under attack by the Bashi bazooks.
Who? Can you spell that?
Yes, it's a strange name, isn't it? Actually, I've got a postcard showing some of them.
Good Lord. They look pretty fierce, don't they? A band of robbers, were they?
They weren't supposed to be. They were regular soldiers of the Ottoman army, mainly Turks, but some Arabs and others. They were supposed to be fighting on our side with our army. Brilliant horsemen, but very ill-disciplined. Look, here's an artist's impression of the event.
Where did you get these drawings from?
Well, some of them are newspaper cuttings, but one of the nurses who was with us at Smyrna and at Renkioi liked to draw, and as you can see, she was good at it. We were very good friends, and when we returned to England, she gave some to me.
How marvellous.
Anyway, I was telling you about the Bashi bazooks. It was Mr. Brunton, our engineer, who raised the alarm. He'd seen them riding towards the hospital, laden with sheep, fowls, geese and grain, stolen from farms. Mr. Brunton arranged for all us women to be taken to safety on 2 ships that were standing off nearby. We were terrified, as you can imagine. We could hear the guns going off as our men fired on the advancing horsemen. They were forced back, and I think some of them were later killed, although one ended up as a patient in our hospital. Imagine that. Well, we'd seen something of that sort while we were at Smyrna. There were bandits there too. One of the gangs captured one of our doctors and held him to ransom.
Shocking. How do you say you spell the Bazibashooks?
Oh, Bashi Bazooks. It's BASHIBAZOOKS. Bashi Bazooks.
Right, got it. So tell me, how long were you at that hospital?
Oh, until the war ended, which was in 1856. We took our last shipload of patients in February that year. After that, there was just a few local workmen, but the hospital was quickly emptying out. The last patients left in June, and we left the following month.
So what happened to the hospital? Did the Turks take it over?
Oh no. It closed down. They wanted to burn it. It was just a pile of wood as far as some people were concerned, but it was a terrible shame. It had been a model hospital, the best in the world in its day. They got everything right, you know. That Mr. Brunel knew what he was doing.
So it all went on the fire?
No, in the end it was sold. Some of the ward huts went to Salamanca because the hospital there had burnt down. The machinery and the equipment was sold off. Mr. Brunton bought quite a lot of it and had it shipped back to England.
And what about you?
Well, I came back to England with the rest of the staff. I had a lot of nursing skill by then. I nursed Miss Nightingale herself. That's when we met.
Was she in hospital?
No, I nursed her in her rooms in London. It was only for a short spell. Dr. Parks, our head doctor at Renkioi, was a good friend of Miss Nightingale, and he recommended me. Then I got word that I had been selected to nurse the Duchess of Kent, mother of Her Majesty the Queen, but she died about the time I was to commence my duties.
So was it then you came to live here?
Oh, but I was still quite young then. Well, 42, and still too young to come here. I found work as a housekeeper in some of the houses of the nobility, but when I got too old and weary for it all, I came back to my own village. Unfortunately, I was offered a place here.
I see. So tell me a bit more about this hospital then.
Well, young man, I'm getting a bit stiff sitting here. I need to stretch my legs a little. Let's walk out into the courtyard and you can see a bit more of our hospital while I tell you about it. Thank you. Good morning, Mrs. Marlowe. How are you?
Very well, Mrs. Hely, thank you.
Mrs. Marlowe is a well-established resident here. How long is it, Mrs. Marlowe? 10 years?
About that, yes, Mrs. Hely. Mrs. Healy's such a good nurse, you know. She looks after us all here.
Oh, I'm not a nurse any more.
But you were. And you've now got that lovely medal to prove it, and we're all so proud of you.
Come along, young man. I'll show you where the real nurses live. Mr. Wilkins built this hospital. See up there? He was a colliery owner, a wealthy man, of course. He owned the old Ravenstone Hall, but that's all gone now. He wanted to build this place to be somewhere where respectable elderly ladies could reside in their old age and be looked after. Sadly, he died before it was finished. The first women came to live here in the early 18th century. In 1729, I think it was. Come this way now. This is where the real nurses live now. It wasn't here in my husband's day. It was built about 40 years ago. There's 4 nurses living here now.
And do you ever help out with the nursing? You must miss the work.
Well, I used to when I first arrived, but I'm too old to be of any use now. I tire easily, and that's why I couldn't travel to Windsor for the investiture, although I would have loved to have gone.
I see. Well, it all looks pretty well cared for. There are servants, I suppose.
Oh, a few, but we're expected to fend for ourselves as much as possible. Some of the residents do take on paid work, like nursing, cleaning, and lighting the fires in the chapel.
But not you. Still, you manage pretty well, I suppose.
Oh, pretty well, yes. But as I said, I tire easily, and I think it's time I went for a little rest. Would that be all, young man?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Mrs. Heely, and thank you for letting me talk to you today. It's been a wonderful story. It'll make a splendid article in my newspaper.
I look forward to reading it.
Shall I walk you to your room?
Oh, that would be most kind. Thank you.